technology webinar organized by our chamber. Well, I must say, and probably you even probably thought, why is the Chamber of Commerce doing now suddenly webinars, seminars on sustainability? Well, that's the reason why is probably better seen as pictures, which I like to share with you. In the waste management, we addressed that in our first seminar at the World Economic Forum 2022. I think it's meaningless to comment on this. And we do have everywhere burning or basically taking the water tank, the other water tank and seawater, the rainforest away. We have a traffic jams, the regions, there's no tomorrow, basically resulting in pollution and floods. Now you probably also ask yourself, why on earth Patrick, who is also responsible for Malaysia, is making the welcome speech? Well, the reason is basically very easy. Our very close partner of the Chamber of Commerce, MIDA, has just put a seminar, not only a seminar, presented the project on hydrogen economy, basically resulting in 2030 of more than 60 billion of ringgit, creating 45,000 employees. We started as the Chamber of Commerce because we recognized the growing importance of sustainability in both business and policy discussions, and therefore having put seminars and solutions to the table to save the world. Now, on the hydrogen, which basically we are discussing today, I do not want to go too much in detail, but the hydrogen is one of the sustainable initiatives, and I call it initiatives because it's still in the foreground, and Europe is probably most advanced. It's a holistic approach. It's the first. If I see the others like electric car, yes, you put electric cars, but then afterwards you ask yourself how many more atomic or nuclear power stations I do need. But the key is where the world should focus is to store the energy. Is it in hydrogen or it is in pure electricity? Now let's focus on the hydrogen. I think there is two benefits, is in the industrial part and on the transportation. And we will have speakers today which are highlighting all these elements. Now, I like to thank you in the name of our also honorable president, Dr. Urs Lustenberger, to run this webinar today. A little bit about our Chamber of Commerce. Our Chamber of Commerce is the largest in Switzerland, covering from the most eastern part Korea to the most western Bahrain, and it represents from the area and population the highest region, so be spoken. So therefore, even more, if you see this region and our responsibility as a Chamber of Commerce, we see a need in putting sustainability in the foreground. Now, I wish to switch to Zheng, who is moderating this very important seminar, and the floor is yours, Zheng. Thank you so much, and all the best for your moderation. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for your kind words, and also for supporting this event and your enthusiasm in this sustainability arena. As Patrick mentioned, this is part of the Swiss Asian Chamber's continuing program to address global environmental issues and sustainability. An investment bank, Goldman Sachs, estimates that clean hydrogen between now and 2050 could decarbonize 15%, 1/5, of all greenhouse emissions across all sectors. This bold statement has, as we all know, many caveats and unknowns, and its delivery would involve all parts of the value chain, massive financing, including venture capital, and not forgetting appropriate regulatory mechanisms. As we all know, technology can not only enhance delivery, but also revolutionize the quest for achieving the hydrogen economy that we all envision. In risk-taking, some outliers will lead the revolution, believe me. So today, the numbers really show a fledgling industry, but unlike many other industries, there is an existential necessity to exploit hydrogen. Overarching the economics, there is an overhang of energy geostrategy in play. And we may touch on this if time allows in the panel discussion. The highlight today, of course, are the people who have agreed and to speak and contribute to our learning. We really are privileged to have on board 4 outstanding individuals, one from research and development at a national level, another from the trading and financing world, a venture capitalist working alongside a renowned inventor in energy, and a business developer who's driving the get-go already in transportation on a global basis. The emphasis today is on transportation, but we will also cover local generation and distribution in communities. The model applies to clusters, industrial clusters. So enough said from my side. Let me start by introducing Dr. Panayotis Dimopoulos Egan-Schuyler. Dr. Egan-Schuyler is the head of Vehicle Energy Systems at the Automotive Powertrain Technologies Laboratory at EMPA. And he has been at EMPA since 2006. For those of you who've just joined and haven't had a closer look, EMPA is the Swiss Federal Lab for Materials Science, Material Science and Technology. Dr. Dimopoulos Egan-Schuyler completed a mechanical engineering diploma in Aachen, his doctorate studies at the Institute for Energy Technology, where he was awarded a silver medal in 1997. Not satisfied with learning, he also completed an MBA in 2000. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you, Dr. Dimopoulos Egan-Schuyler. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lowe, for this very nice introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share with you a couple of arguments concerning hydrogen, a couple of the advantages and a couple of difficulties. The difficulties are on the same time challenges. And as you already said, it is a fledgling industry. And what I would like to show, or what my ambition is to show you a little bit the points which are interesting and the points why they make still the hydrogen industry a fledgling industry. Because of course, we have heard a lot about hydrogen the last, let's say, 10 years, and it's developing, but you may ask, why isn't it developed yet? Now, I was chosen because in my lab, in my group, we have installed and we are operating since about 6 years, the very first hydrogen refueling station in Switzerland. And we are also producing the hydrogen on site. So that's why maybe I am able to show you a couple of technical aspects, but also a couple of economic aspects concerning hydrogen right now. So we are going to make a very short round talking about hydrogen production, talking about storage and refueling, talking about how to use hydrogen in a decarbonized energy system, and I will conclude showing some future steps which I think are also very important. Concerning hydrogen production, you all know hydrogen is produced currently, so you can call your local gas supplier and get some hydrogen, order some hydrogen. However, right now, most of the hydrogen is produced with the so-called steam reforming of natural gas. So you take methane, the methane, you give it steam, so water, practically evaporated, and then you result at the end with hydrogen and CO2. Now, this is exactly the disadvantage of the current method. You have a lot of CO2 emissions. The advantage is you have the lowest possible energy demand per kilo hydrogen produced. So you save in energy, but you do a lot of CO2. And this is currently used. The biggest customers of this hydrogen are the refineries, so places where they produce our fuels, and also the ammonia production facilities, which are at fertilizer, which make the fertilizers. Now, an alternative way to produce hydrogen is with electrolysis. Maybe some of you in high school, you have seen an experiment. Your teacher showed you, he had two electrodes, a little bit of electric energy by a battery. He put them in water and suddenly you could see some gas bubbles. This is practically the way it works. Of course, it's a little bit more difficult in the sense you want to separate the gases because you produce hydrogen and oxygen. The big advantage is you don't have any CO2. The disadvantage is you need much more energy. So you need something like 6 times more energy in electric form than steam reforming, than what is used today. However, you are then clean. There's even a third way to produce hydrogen, which is not used yet, but I personally favor it because I think it gives us some good opportunities to take methane and heat it up. You can heat it up with different sources. You can heat it up, as an example, with heat, just simple heat, or you can heat it up with microwaves. And then methane, at some point, starts to decompose in solid carbon and in hydrogen. Okay, I've got now on the chat a question. The slides are moving. I don't know, my slides are moving. Have you seen other slides apart from the welcome slide? Is it the problem only of one, let's say one recipient, or how are the others? Can they see the slides moving? I hope.
No. Yeah, we can see the slides, but we have to move them ourselves. So that's on my end here in Singapore.
Okay.
Ja gut, wir sind jetzt im 21. Jahrhundert, oder nicht mehr? Wobei Swisscom sich schon noch benennt, das wird sie.
Okay,
Yeah,
if everybody can come to this slide, when I change slide, I will mention it so that you use it, so that you can follow better. Nevertheless, I guess we can continue on this part, and then I will mention every time I change the slide. Okay, I won't go now too much into details, and of course the slides have much more details on the technical level. If you are interested, you can always address me with emails. We don't need to go in every detail. However, we have now seen the ways for producing hydrogen, and we have, let's say, the methane steam reforming, lowest energy, but making CO2, emitting CO2, electrolysis, no CO2. Of course, if renewable electricity is used, not electricity from the European grid. The electricity in Switzerland is quite CO2 free because we don't have any combustion for electricity. We have either water or nuclear. And we have also the pyrolysis, which is the newest technique, which I believe has also the potential, because it results in solid carbon, to lead us easily to a negative carbon emissions. Anyway, this is the way to produce hydrogen. Now, if we just go to electrolysis, as I mentioned, you need water, you need electric energy, and then you get hydrogen and oxygen. There are different electrolysis methods. I won't go into details here. However, the one thing I want to underline is we need a dynamic electrolysis. If we need electricity which is renewable, so if we take electricity from photovoltaics or from wind, we need an electrolysis system which can be powering very fast and can be switched off also very fast without big losses. Now, here are some data of the existing electrolysis devices and about their efficiency and about the cost of hydrogen also in energy and in monetary terms. However, I won't go also too much into detail. I will continue just showing that, of course, after all, in an industrial setup, electrolysis is not as simple as perhaps in the experiment at high school you have seen. You need to treat the water, then you need electricity, you need direct current, so you need transformers, and at the end you need to reform also the hydrogen, which is not completely clean. And finally, also not to forget, you need to compress it, because hydrogen per kilo has a lot of energy. Unfortunately, per liter or per volume at normal ambient pressure, it has a very low energy because it has a very low density. So whenever we're talking about hydrogen, we have to compress it. Now, electrolysis, do we have a lot? I try here in this slide to summarize all electrolysis plants currently operating in Europe and in Switzerland. And the first thing you see here is, first, there are not very many. So if we want to make a hydrogen economy, we need much more. Second, you see, at least in Europe, that they are financed. You see these websites, the Cordis websites are all of research programs financed by the European Union. What you see is they are not relying on private enterprise yet. So it needs the funds from the state to be there. However, you see in Switzerland, we are perhaps a little bit more rational. So we have more the private enterprises and less the state financing. And there are also under construction some interesting bigger plants in Europe, as I say here in Rotterdam. Now I change again slide and now finish this and go to the storage and refueling. As we said, hydrogen, we have to store it. So you see here a schematic of our hydrogen refueling station. We have the hydrogen electrolyzer, the hydrogen production. Then we need to compress, we need to store, and then we need to have the devices to lead the hydrogen to the vehicles, which, let's say, because the pressures we're using are high, they are not, let's say, so simple as thought, and they are also more expensive than the current refueling stations we know with our conventional fuels. You see here a little bit a schematic, and you see here a little bit the problems. Here is our refueling station. We have, as an example, at the level of 390 bar, we store 80 kilos. Now, one truck gets about 20 kilos. And so you could say we can refuel by these four trucks. And unfortunately, it's not the case, because what's happened when you start refueling, you start getting lower pressure on your tanks, and you start having more pressure lower pressure on your tanks. You see it here. After 27.5 kilos, my pressure goes back to 256 bars. I cannot refuel even a second truck. So that's why we have to have storages which are not one bottle, but several, and we use them in parallel. Sorry, in series. We start with the first, we have the pressure decreasing in the first, then go to the second, and every next bottle we use, we can get only a very small amount, because on the vehicle side, the pressure has increased. You say, okay, so what? Why is that so important? you see here a little bit now the real photograph of our refueling station. Left and right, you have the two compressors. Here are the bottles. Here are 4 bottles you can see, and there are 3 rows of these bottles. And then we have 12 bottles. So you say, so what? This is a detail. Yes and no, because all these bottles, they have to be connected with these blue valves you see here in the back. And these valves and this panel back here, this is the most expensive part of the whole installation. This is more expensive than the compressors, and it's more expensive than the carbon fiber tanks. So you see, it's not so easy as a fuel. It has challenges dealing with it. Last but not least, what happens on the vehicle tank here? You see the vehicle tank, if the vehicle tank is almost empty, it gets in 4 to 5 minutes filled, and it gets compressed from 20 bar to 390 bar. It's getting hot. That's why I have to cool down the hydrogen before going in. And here we did a lot of work with, here you see thermocouples in a tree setup inside a tank, where we have to measure the temperatures in order not to exceed the limits, which are at 80 degrees. There, the carbon composite tanks start to delaminate. Yeah, and here you see the result. This is our hydrogen refueling station. It pretty much looks similar to a normal pump. However, it costs more. It costs much more, at least currently. Because currently in Switzerland, we have now recently the 15th refueling station open. So after saying that, I just want to mention very fast that, of course, we have to have always to keep an eye on the CO2. We're not completely CO2 free. And this depends also from the electric power we use for the production of the hydrogen. And that's why perhaps on the market, you start hearing words like blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, black hydrogen, gray hydrogen, etc. It depends on where the electricity comes from. Now, on the energy sector side, we all want renewables, and we're talking about renewables. However, I just want to put the point that renewables, for me, this is wind, this is photovoltaic, and this is water. I don't know of any other renewables. I mean, we can talk about geothermal, but it is still in a very fledgling state. Now, the renewables, where we get the electricity for the electrolysis from, they have also some challenges. At least in Switzerland, we faced severe trade-offs. I mean, if you have followed also the last discussions, we had even a referendum about it. Renewables are welcome. Everybody says, yes, yes, immediately, that's a good idea, but we don't accept plus minus extra cost. We still want full energy availability, and we don't want altering of the landscape. You say, so what? Well, you know, local authorities, if you want to go to them and ask for a wind turbine, they say, oh, yes, good idea, but I have minimal distances they have to be kept. And this is a very good way to push the wind turbines to the next community and not this on. And on the other side, there are, and I'm not critical now, I just say this is what is going on. Environmental organizations, they say solar farms in the Alps, no way, I will oppose them, and I will oppose them up to the last instance to the Swiss Federal Court, which will, of course, delay things. Now, I always say we have to, if I go to the next slides, we have also always to think a little bit in a relative manner. If somebody tells you, okay, photovoltaics, 10 terawatt hours, we need 80 square kilometers of photovoltaics, which is a little bit, which is the fact, it sounds a lot. But if we consider that the Alps in Switzerland have 20,000 square kilometers, it's not very much. So I say, take also, when in these discussions, we have to take care about relative numbers. Now, here is a big study we did at EMPA, and we tried here to see what will happen if we switch off our nuclear plants and replace them just with photovoltaics. And practically, the red line shows the electricity demand, while the gray and the yellow and the blue line show the production. Now, if we try and install enough photovoltaics, we will still have some import requirements in winter, and we will have too much energy in summer. Too much energy is also no good, because this means the photovoltaics have to be switched out. switched off. This means somebody did the investment but does not get any payment for it. So this is not good. As for the winter, it's a big question. I mean, if we switch down our nuclear plants and then we import our energy from France, I don't think we're doing anything very reasonable. But I know this is a big discussion and we don't have enough time for it. If you are interested, I just want to recommend this website. They show every minute how is the energy situation in Switzerland. This is a screenshot I did a couple of days ago. This was the 30th of May, and you see how much we import from France, which we practically export to Italy, and how much with Germany we're plus minus on an equilibrium, and we import a little bit of Austria. And I mean, in this website, I like it very much because you see instantly what's going on and how much we have to import and how much we have to export. Now, okay. However, the whole thing says to us that we have to store. And storing energy is a big question how. Now, shall we do it with batteries? Yes, it's possible, although nobody has done it up to now. And we are talking about megawatt hours. Or we can do it with compressed natural gas. And this has the biggest advantage in the terms of energy density. Of course, we can do it also by hydrogen. And we can do it also by pumping among lakes, but this is the lowest energy density. However, this shows us that either we can store energy either by producing hydrogen or by producing even natural gas. How can we do it? This is, I think, a very interesting, and now I go to the future steps, a very interesting alternative. With electrolysis, we produce hydrogen. We can use hydrogen directly, or we can also capture with another plant CO2, and hydrogen with CO2 gives us methane. The methane is better to store. So I guess this could be a very interesting alternative in order to use energy, superfluous energy in summer, use it for producing methane, storing the methane, and then using the methane when the sun is not shining, or even use the methane in the next winter. This gives us two alternatives, and I'm slowly coming to my conclusions. The first thing, I mean, you see what I was talking about is take water, take renewable energy, make the electrolysis, produce hydrogen. Take CO2 from the air, and then produce methane. And by using this methane, you do again CO2, but this is the CO2 you took off from the atmosphere and water. And so practically, you can even go to a closed circle. Not completely, because every step needs energy, but you can at least reduce your CO2 substantially and have energy. In addition now, if I conclude with a vision, if I can conclude with a vision, we can still do the same circle, produce our synthetic methane, and if we go now and use the pyrolysis, I said in the very beginning, for decomposing the methane molecule, we can get solid carbon, which may be useful for several applications. Of course, not for energetic applications, not for doing CO2. This does not make any sense. We can use the carbon directly that is fossil then, or even we can put it under the earth much easier than CO2 and use the hydrogen for our heat purposes. And let's say this is a little bit my conclusion. This is also my vision. And this has the potential of negative CO2 emissions or negative carbon emissions. And with that, I conclude. I thank you very much. I'm there for questions now or later, and I'm more than happy to answer also questions by email if there should be any. I hope I wasn't too long.
Thank you. You were spot on, Dr. Eggenschwiler. Thank you for your enlightening speech, and also for covering, I wouldn't call it a universe, but a wide spectrum of issues. And your last slide takes me back to my days of molecular science, which I think I perform miserably. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who actually hails from the United Kingdom, same country I come from. In passing, Peter Taylor is Divisional Director at Macquarie Group. It's an Australian financial services group, global in scope, but he's based in Geneva. He's responsible for energy trading, covering a range of fuels, including biofuels. He joined Macquarie in 2014, and before that, he had 10 years of experience working as a commodities trader at Barclays Investment Bank. Peter Taylor has a master's degree in information systems engineering from Imperial College in London. And he has a strong interest in energy transformation and the sector of transportation. So let us listen to his story, and he will also look at some of the financial, some of the challenges as well. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir, and thank you everyone for joining. Let me see if I can share my slides. This is where it gets complicated. Well, hold on. So to give you a bit of background, I think energy transition is one of the biggest opportunities that we currently see in the market. And it's an opportunity that everyone has a capability of sort of executing on. And I think looking at all the different alternatives and fuels, we're going to need all of them. So be that hydrogen, be that ammonia, methanol, other forms of renewable power, batteries, electrolysis, as we've just seen. I think all of them have opportunities. So I wanted to just introduce Macquarie a little bit to start off with. And obviously that starts with a disclaimer for these things. But just talk a little bit about what Macquarie does. And you had a very kind introduction there. As you mentioned, an Australian company, one of the top 10 Australian companies. We have about 20,000 people based globally. And you can see our offices there, our main offices, New York, London, Hong Kong, and of course, Sydney. And the story of Macquarie is also one of Asia. We have a lot of offices based around Asia, and we see significant opportunities in Asia, as I said, in an energy transition. We're one of the largest asset infrastructure investors, especially on the renewable side. We've got $47 billion worth of assets currently under management. So everything from toll roads to power stations to wind farms to pretty much anything you can think of in the infrastructure space. And also very focused on developing these assets. So developing wind farms, developing solar PV, developing all sorts of assets where we see this opportunity in terms of the energy transition. Now, we are very much focused on a net zero ambition, and that's been one of our driving forces. And to sort of achieve that with our clients, we've been looking at a sort of variety of ways. So from the supply side, so as we mentioned previously, wind power, solar PV, and we are also looking at geothermal. Obviously, that's more of a challenge. On the demand side, we're involved in battery and fuel cell. I know we've got the Hyundai vehicles in Switzerland on the hydrogen lorries. We've actually financed some of those in the US. We've looked at fleet solutions around batteries, especially for urban applications, charging infrastructure. We look at renewable power purchase offtakes. We look at CO2 sequestration, gas transmission. So a huge variety of different things. And one of the other things we also do, and really is my focus, is the trading of commodities. And you can see here some of our energy transition activity around the world. So these is just a sort of summary of some of the deals that we've done. And really what I want to focus on here is two things. One is the amount of stuff going on in the US. And I think with the IRA funding opportunities we see now, we're seeing a big increase in activity in the US. And I think Europe is very focused on its climate goals, but I think there's a bit of a mismatch in terms of the funding and the goals. So there's an opportunity to sort of finance and work around that. And the second thing I wanted to highlight was the interconnectivity between the different regions. We're starting to move renewable fuels. We're starting to move all sorts of sort of energy assets around the world. And obviously some countries are going to be sources of renewable fuels and some are going to be sinks of renewable fuels. And going back to our previous speaker, we saw that on the electricity grid, but we also see that at sea. And the maritime side of the business has seen a number of changes recently. The biggest change recently was IMO 2020, which was the desulfurization of vessels. But now with Fuel EU, with the shipping community joining the emissions trading zone in Europe, and also the IMO activity, we're seeing a significant change in maritime transport. And just to sort of focus in on that, that's a focus of both carbon emissions, it's a focus on renewables, it's a focus on clean fuels, critical materials, and also how we finance these activities. That's pretty critical as well. And we do all of these things. So just a couple of examples to run through before I start talking about shipping. We've invested heavily in biomethane, and we see that as a key opportunity. And as our previous speaker again was talking about, methane is a very transportable molecule. So if we can derive it from biogenic sources and move it around, that's a huge opportunity both for the power sector, the chemical sector, and the shipping sector. We've invested heavily in wind farms. This is Corio, which is a huge asset in terms of production capacity. We've invested in PV. But really, just to keep on track in terms of time, I really wanted to talk about the clean fuel space in shipping. Now, there's a lot of terminology here, and the two things I wanted to highlight here is carbon dioxide is not the only greenhouse gas. There's some others out there, methane being one of them. So methane slip through engines is a significant challenge when we're burning methane. As is hexafluoroethane for semiconductor manufacturing, and sodium hexafluoride for the electricity grids when we're building out transformers. Some of these other gases are ridiculously GHG positive multipliers. So we have to avoid all of these emissions. And the way we look at emissions, there's two ways. There's tank to wake, which is basically the burning of fuels from a vessel to the propeller, and then well to wake, which is the full life cycle of the fuel. So from the production to the actual burning of the fuel, what are the emissions? And obviously, the broader the scope, the better. So we prefer to look at well to wake emissions rather than just tank to wake. What can you do? Well, the first thing you can do is you can just stop your activity. Now, stopping your activity is obviously a commercially challenging thing to do. But if there's less efficient routes that you're running, if there's less efficient businesses that you're looking at, and they're polluting significantly, one consideration is just stopping. The second is really reducing the impact, and this is really a story of CapEx. Can you invest in new equipment? Can you invest in new engine technologies, etc., which reduce the impact of your activity? The third is green fuels, and we'll talk a bit, and that's really going to be the focus here. The fourth is regulatory. Increasingly, I mentioned the European ETS. We're seeing a requirement for people to buy carbon credits. Now, that forces you effectively either to spend money on these carbon credits or to improve the efficiency and your emissions of your vessel. So it's quite an expensive thing. Then there's voluntary credits. Now those are things that essentially you can use to top up where you think you've got a bit of a gap in terms of your carbon emissions. And the last option is doing nothing and just ignoring the situation. And certainly in the EU, that just results in a lot of penalties and fines that you'll have to pay. So it is a choice, but it is a difficult one. And obviously from an ESG perspective, it's far from ideal. So this is really the opportunity. Now, where do we see shipping going? Well, the first thing is electrification. So essentially, if you can plug in any kind of transport into the grid, that's what you should be doing. Under a lot of the EU rules, it doesn't actually matter where that grid electricity came from. And it's counted as zero emission. And this is really aimed at vessels which are docked, especially the cruising industry, where there's a significant amount of power consumption just from a hospitality perspective. Plugging in these into the grid so the ship doesn't have to run its engines reduces emissions dramatically. Increasingly, we're seeing this match between where in the future we'll see this match between where this electricity came from and renewable production of electricity, and you'll have to match them off. But electrification is really the first choice. So if you can electrify and you have a plug nearby, that's obviously a solution. Unfortunately, there's not many plugs out at sea, and so for legacy solutions, we're seeing increased use of biofuels. And we're seeing a move away from crop-based biofuels to waste-based biofuels, and that's obviously better from an environmental perspective, reusing our waste. And this solution is pretty low capex, but biofuels are very expensive at the moment, so the costs are quite high. Now, biofuels are probably more of a temporary solution. Where we ultimately want to move is a hydrogen-based economy. And what does that mean? That's a combination of hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol. Now, this is typically a much higher capex. You need to make the investment, but as prices go down, and we're seeing hydrogen prices go down significantly, potentially these fuels are going to be available relatively cheaper. So really that's the progression. So electrify where you can. For legacy engines, use biofuels, but ultimately, as you're ordering new vessels, you should be focusing on hydrogen vessels. And one of the key things that we've seen, especially in Europe and especially in the container market, has been the ordering of dual fuel methanol vessels. So how do you create this value? Well, I think you start at the top, and the absolute key thing is to know your emissions. You need to understand what kind of CO2 emissions you have, and being able to track those is really the basis of where you start. Improving your efficiency, that's pretty key as well. So either upgrading new coatings on the vessel, more efficient navigation systems, bulbous bows, etc., retrofits, or just ordering new vessels. But typically that has a capex cost, but ultimately that lowers your fuel consumption overall. Using green fuels, number 3 there. So we've spoken about biofuels and hydrogen fuels. That's pretty key. And then just route planning operations. So how you use your vessels, do you go in and out of Europe? Do you have more efficient routings? Do you spend less time waiting outside of ports? All of these have a big impact. And then as you go through this is really the commercialization of that product. So you create a lower carbon emission transport system. Can you sell that to your end clients? And that's pretty key. And we do see some value. People are paying more for carbon neutral shipping. And ultimately, I think there'll be a point where everybody wants carbon neutral shipping. And so if you aren't able to offer that to your clients, you're going to suffer. So what are the pathways? So I think for the existing fleet, we're seeing some conversions, and the easiest conversion really is to biofuels. The second easiest one is to methanol, because it's a relatively easy fuel to handle. A lot of ships now are LNG powered, and where we see that going is really trying to source renewable natural gas or renewable methane, be that e-methane or biomethane. And we're also seeing some conversions of LNG vessels to ammonia-powered vessels. Now that's still planned. The ammonia technology is not quite ready yet, but as ammonia comes online, and the advantage of ammonia, of course, is when you burn it, it doesn't produce CO2 because it's a nitrogen-based molecule. We're going to see more and more vessels in the future looking at ammonia. For some routes, we do see battery-powered vessels as well, especially sort of short-haul coastal vessels which are tied to ports, and you spend a couple of days at sea. And then also, of course, increased interest in the regulated and voluntary carbon markets as well. Just to give you an overview of what that means, you can see, and pretty much everybody has the same graph going forward, you can see this decrease in oil-fired vessels and a massive increase in hydrogen economy, hydrogen ecosystem vessels, so be that methanol, ammonia, or hydrogen itself. And the exact split, we don't know yet. But just from a number of orders of dual-fuel methanol vessels at the moment, we're seeing a significant change in the shipping fleet composition. Now, one key thing to mention, green fuels, it depends how you define them, but if you define them as zero or negative carbon intensity, they're very hard to find. And so one definition we have is of blue fuels. Now, that often means carbon sequestration, but really it just means a lower carbon intensity. So we're going to see a number of fuels arriving on the market which aren't necessarily green, but they certainly have less carbon intensity than the traditional fuels that are currently used. And that's a good thing, because if we can have mass availability of that, a 10% improvement in the whole fleet is better than one single green powered vessel. So this availability of blue fuels, which have typically carbon intensities of somewhere between about 20 and 70, is going to be a bit of a game changer going forward in the short term. A little bit sort of a messy slide here. Apologies for that, but the key thing I would say take away from this is airlines have the least choice in terms of fuels. Batteries are still heavy. Hydrogen has a density issue. And so we really see biofuels and e-fuels as the way forward in aircraft at the moment. Cars, as we've mentioned, you've got a choice between EVs and hydrogen. But obviously at the moment, the EV market's dominating, the battery EV market. Heavier vehicles, I think we potentially will see more hydrogen, and that's because of the weight of the battery pack is a bit of an impediment. And shipping pretty much can take any fuel, which means it will take the cheapest fuel that's out there. And ships can burn pretty much anything. But the issue with shipping, of course, is the volume of fuel that they need. Two last slides. I'm running out of time. I probably have run out. Pricing of these fuels is becoming very challenging. So previously everything was based on oil. Now we're starting to see agricultural products coming into biofuels. We're starting to see gas and electricity pricing coming, especially into hydrogen. And with the new ETS markets and carbon trading generally, carbon is becoming a significant impact. And this means pricing of fuels becomes really, really challenging going forward. And if pricing is challenging, that means financing is challenging, because we have little certainty on what the price is, let alone what it is going forward. And so we really see two ways of pricing fuels. The first is to take an approach from a project perspective. So you look at the cost of the feedstock, and that could be electricity, green electricity, or some kind of bio waste. You look at the OPEX, you look at the return on capital, and then any subsidies that you get. So the IRA I mentioned in the US. The other price mechanism is the decarbonisation price. And that's the advantage price really to the end user. So the current fuel minus the cost to decarbonise that versus the tax benefits. And if you do that, you get two very different numbers. and occasionally they're closer, but generally they're very different. And so going forward, we're expecting this evolution of a spot market where people start to trade these new greener fuels more like they do oil currently. But that's still quite a long way out as we build out our infrastructure. And that's the end of my presentation. I think we're taking questions at the end, right?
Yes, we will. Thank you very much, Peter, for covering the broader range of fuels, focused on the bulk transport sector. Well, we now turn on to a very interesting part of our presentation. I'd like to introduce Antonio Biffi, who is an entrepreneur, and he is involved in launching and capital raising for startups. He's a co-founder and CEO of Voltiana. I won't go through the full name of the company. You see that on the list. It's focused on electrolyzers. Mr. Biffi started his career in the financial markets, working for Paribas and then Deutsche Bank before forming his own company in 2008. He has a degree in applied economics, marketing, economic analysis from the University Católica del Sacro Cura, if I have my pronunciation right. And amongst all of us, he's the most fortunate because he is based in Como, or around Lake Como. So over to you, Antonio.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Stang, for organizing this, which is fantastic, and thank you for the previous speakers who quite interesting in a very detailed way were able to explain a lot of the aspects of the state of the art of the industry and the expectations for the next years. So let me just introduce you quickly Voltiana. Okay, in the spectrum that was presented before, there is always one common situation. When you talk about decarbonizing, you need to use green hydrogen. And what we do at Voltiana is we concentrate on the production of the electrolyzers, which are the machines that enable the production of hydrogen. And particularly, our electrolyzers were studied since the beginning just to create green hydrogen, which is one of the aspects that was also pointed out before by Mr. Panayotis. So you need to be able to switch it on and off timely, this machine. So our machine is innovative, and it's called the Voltiana process. We're not the only company producing this machine right now, but we are probably the only one that is able to innovate the process to much larger scale. And this is exactly what we are concentrating upon since we started the company. So how does it work? In the first slides, you just see our logo and the people. You see Giancarlo Scioli is the inventor. If you run Giancarlo Scioli in Google Scholar, you will see that Giancarlo has endless patents. He started producing patents very young and never stopped. And it's countless, really. The guy is a genius. And we met accidentally a few years ago, and he told me about this idea that he felt really compelling, but he was not able to turn it into reality because nobody was listening to the idea when he was talking to big companies like Eni, Snam Gas, etc., in the big Italian, and not only to the big companies, but also to the authorities. Nobody was answering. So I decided to talk to my friend Paolo Scarabelli, who is also co-founder, who is expert in the creation of big plants for treating air and also waste management. And then I thought, okay, if Paolo is interested, he has the knowledge. I come from investment banking. We need somebody who's very technical and able to deal with complex plants. So Paolo was immediately available, and we started working together in 2019. We created the company last year with Giancarlo also being one of the shareholders. And basically, why do we do it? Because we believe that if all of us do something into the green economy, by putting together everybody's effort, we can come to a solution. And nobody can do everything. So let's have a look at the next slide here. So slide number 2, for who is not able to see my slides moving. Here we can see the expectations of how the green hydrogen is basically developing in the next years. Everything is just based on expectations, but what is important is that it's growing massively. I think potentially even more than what we are expecting now. And we can see from this slide that iron and steel are among the biggest polluters. And we expect them to be among the first people who will invest in electrolyzers. But also we have transport, we have power, we have buildings. It's pretty transversal across many industries. We go to the next slide, because what I wanted to tell you is that we as Voltiana concentrate initially on alkaline electrolyzers. Now, I don't want to bore you with too many details, because thankfully a lot of that was mentioned before. But the alkaline is probably the most reliable source of electrolysis right now, because it's been tested for a long time. We have data of alkaline that were installed by Engineer Scioli that went on for more than a decade without needing maintenance, which is incredible and is very important for the people who want to invest their money into producing hydrogen. It's important for them to know that, first of all, they have very low running costs, so the OPEX is really minimal. And secondly, they can count on the electrolyzer to keep working for a very long time. So if you, without interruptions, you can have a better estimate of your productivity, and also you don't disappoint the people that are waiting for the hydrogen to be produced. Well, PEM and solid oxide, we can see in the next slide, are from some points, they're very interesting because they have higher efficiencies and they have other characteristics, but they're at the moment they're less reliable. So I would not put too many eggs of my basket into these two technologies, because if I'm running the hydrogen supply of a little town or transportations, etc., where people expect the hydrogen to be delivered, I don't want to have the risk of not being able to deliver it. And this is what happens in the other situations, particularly in PEM. Rust is a problem. Okay, so they have to sometimes stop it and change parts. And the other system is very interesting, especially when you are in presence of a heat. But also there are problems with durability. So probably in the future, our guess is 4 or 5 years minimum, there will be more improvements in this sector, in these other ways of producing hydrogen. But right now, and for a long time, we believe alkaline will be the best choice, also for the price. I brought here one of these just to show you. The way we produce it is using fiberglass. So the fiberglass is a much cheaper and cost-effective system to produce these electrolyzers. Of course, we have metal as well, and then we have membranes and electrolyzer, cathodes, etc. They will go in that are also metallic, plus catalyst. But the fact that we started adopting fiberglass reduced a lot the size, the weight, and also the cost, and sometimes somehow also the speed of production. So we are working to have all of these elements reduced to reduce the cost and to increase the potential for production. And hence here I'm sharing the new slide, which is the hydrogen economy and technologies, whereby you see some bullet points about why we think that these alkaline systems that we're producing are potentially the best to be adopted right now. And just reading them, the construction, as we just went through, we use these resins that are lasting very long time and they don't rust. And of course, they don't also have troubles of durability. Scalability, at the moment, we don't produce, we're not planning to produce hundreds because demand is just picking up, but we can scale the production easily, and scalability is key to lower the cost, of course. And then, well, of course, we mentioned the rusting system that doesn't happen. Voltiana. Okay, this next point is concerning the fact that we started the electrolyzer concept from the fact that they needed to work with renewable sources. And this is key because the variance of the input of electricity can kill electrolyzers. Too much energy, and then all of a sudden there is a cloud, no energy at all. I mean, the electrolyzers are delicate systems within which something happens, which is physical and chemical. So the conditions for the chemical and chemical reaction to happen are delicate. In our systems, there is a software that contributes to the regulation of switching on and off parts of the machine, and this makes the machine very efficient and also very reliable for a very long time. Basically, we have all the data to prove and to give to whoever is interested to know about the productivity. And in reality, also, again, the OPEX attached to these investments are very, very low. So we think that, especially if you want to put one of these machines in the middle of nowhere, because you are producing hydrogen better there, which is maybe the sea or somewhere away from town, you don't want to be able to be needing to go there too often for fixing the machine. So if you have a reliable machine, probably is the best choice. Concluding, there is an issue with pressure. Hydrogen, as was said before, is a very volatile product, but our machines are able to produce already pressurized hydrogen. So in reality, when we know exactly what our clients need, we can make sure that the electrolyzer produces exactly what is the pressure that the client needs at the end. So we don't need to put at the end of it necessarily too much compression possibility. So this is concerning Voltiana. I wanted to also tell you something about how we think, because everybody's sharing nicely their ideas. And we believe that, well, I've noticed that there are two ways of approaching. One is always top down and one bottom up. We think that the strategy should be top down because we need laws, we need incentives, and we need a common view and direction, and that of course comes from politics. But also we think that the solution cannot be only linked to big plans, because we think that there can be a solution also coming from local authorities. And it was mentioned before, if you calculate what is your the amount of energy that you need, you can work your way back and calculate also what is in terms of plans that you need to put down to service the energy needs. Now, this is easy in our view if you analyze the geography of the places where you need the energy to be utilized, and then you can create renewable plants of average size starting from 6,000 square meters and north of that. And basically, if you apply at the end of it an electrolyzer to make sure you don't waste the excess energy produced, you can actually tailor the solution in a way that you can have access to hydrogen when there is no sunshine or wind or hydro generated. And in this way, then you can use hydrogen with fuel cells or directly. But this is a way that you can actually strongly and positively give an answer locally to the need for producing and using green energy. Now, to give you two examples of what we're doing, we are now part of the Malpensa Hydrogen Valley, which is an hydrogen valley that tries to put in perspective the need of hydrogen for trucks, and trucks were a subject of before, but also for airplanes. And Airbus has been developing since 2019 new models of airplanes that will be propelled by hydrogen. So the Malpensa people are getting ready to be able to produce and handle hydrogen, and this is what we are trying to help them to do by supplying our knowledge and our electrolyzers for the project, which is huge. Also, we are talking to local authorities in Como, because we are Chernobyl based, which is right next to Como, for putting also our plants near the waste management plants, etc., in order to be able to start a virtual process whereby we can actually use local green energy to produce hydrogen to power trucks or also local buses. So we want to be aligned with what we say, and we started locally to produce answers, and we welcome the presence of people like Moeckli that have a bigger logic and a broader approach to give answers, because we think that people like Moeckli can actually master the way they enter projects and fuel potentially much faster the answer that can actually and has to be given also from the local players and local authorities. And we leave the question for later.
Thank you, Antonio, for your presentation and vision. We now turn to our final speaker, Mr. Hikmet Daci, who is he's based in Switzerland. He's an international business development consultant at a 3WM group, which represents the HTI-1 system, whose technology for mineral oil tanks prevents the evaporation of stored fuel. This hydrogen system is new, and its application is targeted also to the electronics sector. It was actually commercialized a couple of weeks ago, or months, I'm not sure when, but Mr. Daci will explain. And he is involved in strategic development globally. There seems to be a rush for this type of technology, so we're very pleased to have him because this is really much a technology that is, I would say, get-go. We've actually titled this as impactful transitional solutions, and Mr. Daci remarked that, well, it might not just be transitional, this might be the solution, or one of many. So I will now turn the floor to Mr. Daci, who will present. Over to you.
For this event, giving us the opportunity to introduce our technology. I would also like to warmly welcome all the participants on this occasion. So our company 3WM VM stands for wastewater mobility. and our motto is, it is our duty to the next generation to keep the globe clean. So our product is a hydrogen kit, which can be installed in any vehicle having a thermal engine. So in this case, we have the third generation for trucks. Actually, our system's name is HTI1 for titanium, and after a long research, we could start the commercialization of this product, and we started installing in trucks, in buses, in small cars, even in generators. Yeah, that's we started in France, in Switzerland, and we have also in northern countries companies interesting in this system. So let me continue. So thermal engines. So as everybody knows, combustion engines use heat as an energy carrier to produce mechanical motion, and therefore this technology is said to be still imperfect because of the uncompleted combustion. So our system is helping to get a better combustion, because diesel or petrol is combusting at a temperature of 200 to 220 degrees, and with that you can burn all these harmful emissions or these particles, because in diesel or petrol you still have 10-12% of liquid hydrogen, which degrees. So with our system, we can manage to have a high to 580 degrees. With that, we reach a perfect, well, nearly perfect combustion. That means we can burn all these emission particles which are polluting our globe. So we know that hydrogen is the most powerful fuel known to date. I will show you why, because you see the calorific value of petrol, which is 43.6, diesel 44, LPG 46, and you see that hydrogen has a calorific value of 141.9, so it means the triple as the others, Sorry. Going to the next. So for us, the challenge, I mean, for the inventor, the challenge was to have a system which can be installed easily in any vehicle, in buses, in boats, cars, tractors, or generators. And the fact is that our system, we are not carrying hydrogen inside the vehicle. We are producing oxyhydrogen or hydrogen on demand. So for that, I will show you here how it works. We have here a cylindrical container for distilled water. And for the first time, we put a little bit of potassium and we fill it with distilled demineralized water. So this is for a small vehicle, which here we can fill 1 liter of distilled water, and then we have the bubbler, the last filtration before it goes to the combustion. But the key on this system is the electronic part. Because of this CPU, we can produce dynamical oxyhydrogen, and this makes the difference to the other to the competitors of the system. So with that, and our power source is the battery of the car, of the truck or bus, whatever, because for smaller cars we need 5 to 30 amperes, which is enough to produce the hydrogen. So inside this cylindrical container we have the electrocells. They are made of titanium, and here you see this is the cylinder I'm talking about, which is housing the electrolytic cells inside. So this, as I said, this is for smaller cars, which contains 1 liter of distilled water. For trucks, we need 2 of these because it depending on the power of the car or the cc. So for trucks we have 2 of these cylinders. Each one takes 2.5 liter distilled water. So sorry. So going back to this picture, the hydrogen goes through a tube to the bubbler, and there it will be filtrated for a last time, and then we insert the oxyhydrogen to the combustion, and to show you on trucks, this is a heavy truck. Here we have 3 kits, as you can see, and with this system we are able to reduce the emission up to 84%. So we made a trial with a Range Rover, old one, 35 years old. So before the installation, we had Euro 0 for this car. And once we installed this system, this old Range Rover became Euro 5. So imagine today you have trucks Euro 6. They are pretty good, fitted with technologies to avoid all these emissions, but even there we can reduce the emission more than 40%, and also we can reduce the consumption of petrol or diesel. For trucks it's like 20%, and for smaller cars 40%. For an example, we have installed this system in our car, and we have a reduction of the consumption of like 50 to 60%. So we used to make 750 kilometers with a full tank, and right now we are able to make a range of 1,220 kilometers. So it's equivalent to like 50-60% of saving. Maybe you will ask how much such a system does cost. For smaller cars, it starts from 2,500 euros. For the heavy trucks, goes up to 12,500 euros. And our system, each kit has an insurance for civil liability towards third parties, which covers up to 1.5 million euros, and is covered by the insurance Allianz Insurance. And here we have the certificates given by different authorities in Italy, which are also accepted in the whole Eurozone. And as you can see here, we can install it in boats, in tractors, and trucks, and buses. Maybe you know this bus, Flixbus. So in Italy, actually, we have more than 10,000 vehicles installed with this system, And the emission test was proven by BRC. BRC is very known in the automotive industry, which is in the northern part of Italy. So it's like the automotive valley in Europe, besides Brescia, where Lamborghini, Ferrari, and all these big names are located. So for me, this was my short introduction of our product. As I said, I will not need 15 minutes, so that's my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Daci, for stepping in. I mean, for your effort, I would say. And we'll come back to you with some questions. We're going through a panel discussion right now, and we are also going to open the floor to questions. But we actually are running short of time. I want to throw a question at Peter Taylor. Peter, you mentioned a very big mismatch between Europe and the US. And I'm actually rather familiar with the so-called IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And actually it's very timely because a lot of the emphasis in the IRA will be in the alternative fuel sector, and hydrogen is one of the key areas, including some specialist nuclear applications, which Bill Gates is financing in Wyoming. But it's a huge program. And unfair practices has already cropped up from the EU with 60 billion allocated for the IRA. So on the one hand, you have this huge pool, but you also mentioned there's a big mismatch. Could you just from a global sense, just take us through, how this mismatch will actually be remedied, or the way you see it?
Sure. I mean, I'll leave the comments on whether this is unfair practice or whatever, but I mean, you could also look at it as an opportunity. We've seen the US move from being a net energy importer to an exporter, and both on the oil front and the LNG front. But the key there is that gas prices in the US are much lower than they are in Europe. So we already see a flow of energy from the US to Europe. If these IRA subsidies sort of come to fruition, and it seems like they will, then potentially we will see a flow of renewable fuels from the US to Europe. How we move those fuels, of course, is a challenge. And there's a lot of discussion about green ammonia being a carrier of hydrogen, for example. But it potentially we'll see fuel production in the US and Europe importing it. Europe seems to have gone a slightly different track, and that's really around taxation of dirty fuels, whereas the US is subsidizing clean fuels. So there's a bit of a mismatch, I would say there. I do think what's happening here, and it's really interesting, is there's a digitization of energy. And what I mean by that is, if you think about communications back in the day, we all had phones with copper wires and we used to call each other up. And nowadays we have mobile phones, which are connected to base stations. And I think a lot of these hydrogen projects are going to be smaller scale, and they're going to serve local communities in much of the same way as mobile phones are sort of cell-based. And then you'll have a grid or transport systems for fuels between connecting these various projects. But I think in Asia, the opportunity here is to create small hydrogen economies based around, local electrolysis, let's say, or synthetic fuel, e-fuel production, or biofuels, and then link those up on a national and international level. We're not trying to create a super grid here that connects the whole world. We're trying to create local economies which can have their own subsidies and tax incentives, whatever gets things going, but also have involvement from local companies and the population. And then essentially balance those out across the world by moving some of these fuels. But I think the key thing here is we're moving from a easy transportation to a much more local based network of energy.
Thanks very much for your comments. I want to turn over to Professor Eggenschwiler, Dr. Eggenschwiler, on the methane solution. I don't see him on the screen, but yeah, there you are.
Still there.
The question I have, or we have, is you ended with a very positive note on methane, methanol and methane, and I was wondering how far we are from any breakthrough in that area. I'm not talking about the theory and the aspects that you've mapped out, but really in terms of the larger, a meaningful scale implementation of that stream.
Yes, we have first laboratory scale devices. There is a French startup company aiming in producing bigger such devices. And at least in Switzerland, there is one project aiming to have 2025 a first methane pyrolysis plant producing hydrogen and solid carbon. The hydrogen will supply an industry for their heat demands, while the carbon, in the first place, may be sequestrated, but depending on its structure, we are currently looking for several applications in different fields. I see the major advantage of something like that also in combination with Asian countries. You see, based on my my presentation, but also on the presentation of the other presenters, we need at the start we need renewable energies. So we need sun and we need wind. Now we know in Europe it's not abundant, but in Asian countries, I'm talking now more about Middle East right now, we have desert areas. We can have their photovoltaics producing hydrogen with electrolysis. We can have CO2 capturing plants, and we can do their synthetic methane. Now, this methane can be transported to Europe. Why? Because we have the infrastructure, we have the pipelines, we have the LNG ships, we have the network. And of course, my, let's say, vision is some of this methane will be directly used for energy purposes, and some of this can be on the spot, even in a local area, be pyrolyzed so that we use the hydrogen and we dispose the carbon or use the carbon for different materials. I mean, there are some applications currently under discussion. We can, if we manage to produce conductive carbon, we can use it for anodes of batteries. If we have other kinds of carbon, we can mix it with concrete. So there are these applications. However, it's still, I cannot say that we have a big pilot plant. 2025, the pilot plant should work. It will be outside of the city of Zug.
Thank you. Thanks very much. There are some questions coming in, and some of these are actually pointed at specific speakers. So I think there is one, since we have a bit of time, I have a question coming from Mr. Lietova. It's addressed to Mr. Beefy. Antonio, what is the efficiency of a typical AEL system in compared to a stated efficiency of 18 kilogram per megawatt hour. Would you have the answer to that?
No, sorry. Say again. The efficiency of because the 18 kilogram per hour per megawatt is our efficiency at the moment.
Yeah. The question is, what's a typical what is a typical system in terms of efficiency compared to the Voltiana's 18 benchmark? How wide is it? How far?
I think there is no much difference. We are trying to move it up, but in reality, the innovation that we want to put into the system are not necessarily how much per megawatt, but the idea is that we want to reduce the cost of the 1 kilo at the end of the process. So you can do that by also increasing the size of the electrolyzer in a way that is much cheaper to produce hydrogen, because also the input of capital is much less at the beginning. So one electrolyzer, for instance, of 2 megawatts. Now with our technology, say we produce easily 250, 500 kilowatt plants. So if you consider a 500 kilowatt plants to produce a system that in fact takes into account 2 megawatts, you need 4 plants, which means and you put them in a system in a row, and then altogether they combined, they reach 2 megawatt values. But you have to spend a lot of money to develop the single 500 kilowatt plants, and time and engineering, etc., etc. If you do one single plant of 2 megawatts, of course, you cut a lot of time of production, engineering costs, people working to producing it, etc., etc. You can cut down massively the cost of the plant. Now, the problem is that it's not automatic. You cannot just take one of these discs that I've shown you and make it bigger. It doesn't work like that, because we are talking chemical and physical reactions. And when you bring the size up, the reactions do not happen in the same way inside the cell. So you need to make sure that you optimize the production from a 2 megawatt cell. So maybe you don't increase the production, but for sure you don't want to decrease the production, because otherwise it doesn't make sense to produce 5-10 megawatt plants. And this is what happens in companies that have created already 5 megawatt plants and they are advertising it, but in reality the production is not efficient, and this has a lot of weight if you consider the 10 years, 20 years duration of the plants. If you multiply inefficiency for 20 years, I mean, it's a massive loss of production and of economies. So in reality, we will try to make better performances from the 1 megawatt into kilos. But what we want to do is to make all the other economies around better, which is the one that are of easy reach for us at the moment to get.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's not a given. Please.
I believe Dr. Eggenschwiler has a comment to make or to add on to that.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to add, at our site, we operate a 180 kilowatt electrolyzer, proton exchange membrane, and it is about 16 where we are, 16.2 perhaps kilos per megawatt hour, or let's say, I say with 180 kilowatts, we are producing a little bit less than 3 kilos of hydrogen per hour. Perhaps an interesting aspect, just to put it on the floor, is I learned it myself recently, is also a very important point is from the fuel cell manufacturers on the purity of the hydrogen. I was surprised to learn that Toyota and Hyundai, they say that they do not accept, nobody can measure it, but they do not accept more than 5 ppm water in the hydrogen. I don't know why, because after all, if, let's say a fuel cell, it produces water. Why should it be so sensitive to water? I guess most probably they want to avoid any mechanical damages due to freezing when the temperatures in winter go down. However, these are also aspects we have to think about when going in the hydrogen economy. So the purity of the hydrogen. And by my personal comment is there, I see that the old piston engine is easier to be used with hydrogen. I mean, a piston engine that combusts only hydrogen, it can combust also with a little bit of water, is no problem at all. Anyway, just a comment.
Well, that's an interesting, important comment on purity of hydrogen. Something, I mean, however you define it, right? Just want to turn over to Mr. Dacci. You mentioned that your offering already has 10,000 applications of vehicular in Italy. I mean, obviously you're starting where the company has its manufacturing base and so on. Where do you, and it seems to me the product has global has opportunities globally. Are you also reaching out to the Middle East and Asia? I asked because our chamber is very much covering, as Patrick Kriesmer mentioned, a very large area.
Yeah, we have requests all around the world, and if you mention especially Asia, so actually we have contacts in Malaysia and Indonesia, interesting in this product. During my presentation, I forgot to mention that this year in April there was the Invention Geneva exposition. So we were awarded as the best invention by the international press. So I'm proud to add this because this product is really outstanding product, and so with this we can help reducing emissions. So because you cannot change all the vehicles from today to tomorrow. So and I believe that that hydrogen can be a real competitor to electrified mobility. So and as I heard from the other professionals, so it's not the end now. So there is still a long way to go to develop this hydrogen. So this is what I believe, together with the others.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean that is a good summary from your side, and I'm just since we're running out of time, I just like to give the opportunity to each of the other speakers just to have a last word about you know, about well, not just this event, what else you would like to add to conclude our inspiring event. So start with you, Dr. Moeckli-Schneider, if you have a few comments.
Yes, for me personally, one interesting change has happened in the last, let's say, 12 months, and this is that the interest rates have risen worldwide. And I am really interested to see what will be the impact, because, you know, higher interest rates means practically nothing else than the money is getting more expensive. So I'm very interested to see what will be the impact to these projects, because we are all talking, after all, about investments with a quite high upfront capital needs. And my colleague talked already about CapEx, which are not low, and OpEx. And I'm very interested to see what will be the impact now in all these efforts to decarbonize our system, and where we will be in about 2 years. of course, also in 5 years, but let's say the 2 years is, I think, the most interesting part.
Yeah, so the crystal ball is put in front of, well, we have two people who know the financial markets. Maybe I start with you, follow on with you, Antonio, your view on costs because of the rising interest rate scenario, and then I'll move on to Peter to have his for him to have deliver his summary and last word. Go ahead.
I think of course this is unfortunate, but it's part of the game. So somehow I don't think 4%, 5% is going to be such an issue for the development of something that is so important as the green economy. We can factor the cost of finances into the models, and we can survive for 5% because it's also healthy to have a cost of money in my way of seeing things. But then, of course, you can debate for years about that. So at the moment, I don't see really a problem, especially because what I didn't mention before, but these plants, once you have paid for the investments, they produce virtually hydrogen for free every day, which is incredible. I mean, if you think about it, I ran the numbers, is not so scary. It's actually quite affordable at the end of the day. So yes, if you think about massive plants, then they are super expensive. But the single plants and the single usage, if you price it with current energy prices, it's fully viable from my point of view. And hence is a sin not to be preaching this idea at the current prices. Then if you put the prices down like 10 times, then of course we are completely in another scenario. But at current energy prices, you can actually make a point that we should rush and do it all together right now. I thank you very much. I need to go to the train, and I particularly enjoyed my suggestion and my idea is, because it was so interesting and I like all the different aspects. Why don't we make this a recurring event? Every year we can update on what happens, or we can have also a way to exchange ideas or input, because I think it's very valuable. We have people from very different backgrounds and different also organizations that are more public, private, finance, manufacturer. Maybe you can also increase it. It would be nice.
I think we can put that together. That's a great idea, constructive, Antonio. I will discuss with Barbara, and then we can put a small circle together, also with a view to continuing dialogue, so we keep abreast of each other's developments as well. Okay, thank you, Antonio, and I hope you catch your train in time. Yeah. And okay, bye. Thank you. Bye.
Have a great bye.
Okay, over to you, Peter. You have the final word. Or words.
I think following on from Antonio, we should be very positive about this. We'll work it out, I think, is the answer. I mean, just look at the cost of solar PV. That's gone down the cost curve. It's now a very, very cheap form of electricity, as is wind. The technology has improved. We regularly see it competing on the grid in terms of pricing. So I have a lot of faith in technological improvement, and I think hydrogen is just getting started. So it's really exciting. And I also think there's a huge commercial opportunity for people to go green, be that with their clients, be that with the sort of ESG side of their businesses, but also being able to compete against the traditional providers, the traditional grids, the traditional transport companies, etc. Just look at the number of EVs currently BEVs being sold in Europe right now. So I finish with optimism, and I think we'll get there on the financing side.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm going to let in a moment Patrick say a few words, but from my side, it's been a great event. I wanted to thank each of you and your respective organizations for your participation, and in fact intense intense participation. I also wanted you to note that despite the rushed calendar, we have actually more than 12 nationalities represented in this event. We didn't have enough time to get some of our northern neighbors, but we actually have participants from the Middle East, from Canada, across Europe, and a lot from Asia, in particular from Thailand. It's a strong showing. Also, we also have participants from Pakistan and Bangladesh, and a few of the other countries within our remit. Some of these people you will see from the guest list hold very senior positions in some of the organizations they represent, and I think this event will have momentum. It is, after all, a fledgling industry, but that also means that it has huge potential to grow beyond what we might imagine. I'm glad Peter mentioned mobile telephony, because I've been involved in mobile telephony from pre-start right through 3G, and then I gave up after 3G. And I will hand over to Patrick. Patrick, are you on board?
Yes, thank you, Sang, for this
please.
wonderful closing. I'd just like to say thank you to the honorable speakers for their efforts and to explain us more into hydrogen. I'd just like to add that the EU is spending more than 5 billion on R&D on hydrogen. Neither US nor China investing only a fraction of that. So this gives us in Europe a huge opportunity to be the leader in this industry. And we have the opportunity. We should not give it away like the internet we gave away to the US. This should be a European strong innovation, and we should be the leader here, because if you see the figures, it's unbelievable. And how much it is also done. The EU is putting not only money, they are pushing towards this hydrogen. There's no tomorrow. And that's my closing remark from my side. And thank you so much that you participate on this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks once again to everyone. And let's end the session.